no part of this video. Relationship, not religion. Let's talk about it. Jesus, coffee. So you guys hear me say this a lot. You hear me say it's not about religion, it's about relationship. But I want to put some biblical backing to that, because I don't want you to think that's just a saying. That's just your opinion, Jim. No, I want to put some biblical backing to this. Good morning, Janice. And talk about it. So, I'm going through a book called I Can't See God Because I'm in the Way. Good book. By Bruce Bickle and Stan Jans. And I want to get into something they talked about that really hit me last night. But at first, I want to dig into this. So, good morning, Eddie. What's going on, buddy? So, when we talk about it's about relationship, not about religion. You guys often hear me say it's not about, going to church every week and standing in a church or sitting in a church every week makes you a Christian as much as me standing in a garage makes me a Corvette or it makes me a Ferrari. Doesn't. Going to church every week is a religious check in the box, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. So I want to get into the scripture that really kind of talks about this. So I'm going to go through Matthew 22, and in this, Jesus is actually being tested by one of the Pharisees, which are religious experts. So they're religious experts of the law. And we're talking about the law of Moses. But I want to listen in on this dialogue that happens between these two. And now I want to talk about the deeper meaning of this. So when the Pharisees heard that he'd silenced the Sadducees, which were underlings to the Pharisees, they gathered together. Then one of them, a lawyer, asked him a question, testing him and saying, "Teacher, what is the greatest commandment in the law?" So he's trying to trap him by talking about in the law of Moses, the Ten Commandments. Jesus said to him, "You shall love the Lord your God with all of your heart, all of your soul, and all of your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment." And I love his response. The second is, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments hang all the law and prophets. So he says, doesn't matter how good you nail those other 10, you better nail 1 and 2. And just so you know, when he talks about you shall love the Lord your God with all of your heart, soul, and mind, he's actually referencing a passage from Moses to the Israelites before Moses' death. And it comes from Deuteronomy 6. It's actually Deuteronomy 6:5. He goes in to say, in verse 4, "Hear, O Israel," so he's talking to the Israelites, "the Lord your God, the Lord is one." Verse 5, he says, "You shall love the Lord your God with all of your heart, all of your soul, and with all of your strength." So when Jesus references that passage, when Jesus tells him that, he's referencing that passage. Again, the cross references between the New Testament and the Old Testament. How could Jesus know about that unless Jesus was there, unless he was Lord? He couldn't have known about it. That happened hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years before Jesus ever stepped foot on earth. Yet he tells him, he shows him right in that moment, it's not about religion, it's about relationship. We often think that, hey, I've got the 10 Commandments. That's my checklist. I did that, I don't do that, so I get a check there. I don't do that, I get a check there. I don't do that, I get points for that. No, guys, it's not a scoreboard. You don't rack up points and go, you know what? I'm better than he is because I get more points than he does. Of course Jesus wants to save me. You see how many points I earn? You see how many points I get? Here's one thing I challenge with that. He doesn't keep score of what you do wrong. So who are you to keep score of what you do right? Here's one thing I want you to think about and think really hard about this. He delivered the Israelites out of Egypt before he gave them the 10 Commandments. What do you mean, Jim? He gave them grace before he gave them law. He said, let me get you to where you're safe first. Let me save you. Let me take you out of that danger first. Because I love you. Now here, follow these. Grace came before the law came, right? So it's no different than what he does when he saves us, right? Because he saves us wherever we are. It doesn't matter how deep and how far, and it doesn't matter where we are. He comes right where we are and saves us. He meets us right where we are. Jesus meets the messes and he cleans them up. After he cleans you up, then you get in the Word, right? Because we're not digging away in the Word before we're saved. Doesn't often happen. How many Christians are cracking their Bibles open on a constant basis and spending time with the Lord? Probably a lot less than should. But you see what I'm saying is he saves us first, then gives us his word and says, this is how we're going to spend time together, and this is how. It's not about law. It's not about that checklist. It's about grace. It's about relationship. I'm going to save you before I give you commands to follow. Because guys, those commands aren't chores. It's not a chore list. Hey, I did my chores this week. No. Spending time in here is not a chore. And if you feel like it's a chore, then that's where there's a heart check that needs to be done. As I often say, you need to do a checkup from the neck up. Because if spending time in the Word is a chore and it's something that feels arduous and tedious to do, then you really need to check your heart, not even from the neck up. It needs to start in the heart, because that means you don't have that deep love and that deep relationship with the Lord. Because spending time in His Word, this is where He communicates with you. This is where He talks to you. This is where you talk to Him in prayer. So it's not about religion, guys. It's about relationship. Jesus showed us that, and God showed us that when He communicated it to the Pharisees. So, just kind of something I wanted to go through and share this morning. That's a check down from, that's a crash. We crash back down to earth when we think that we're doing everything we can and we're checking off that list. No, the crash back down to earth comes from He doesn't keep score on what we do wrong, which I'll bet you that would be a whole lot bigger score than what we do right. So He gives us that grace. Let's embrace that grace. Let's embrace that mercy. Let's not try and keep score. Let's chase the one who gave us grace first. Let's chase where the grace comes from first before we do anything else. Chase grace. So, I love you guys. I know He loves you like crazy. We'll be back tomorrow with whatever Dad wants to talk about.